An arm covered in bandages is seen placing his hand inside a jar. When the hand is removed from the jar, some sort of grayish mud is seen coming out of the jar. A man wearing a skull headpiece with crazy eyebrows tells the hunters it's time to gather around and it was time to start the hazing ceremony. His hand is covered in the mud that was in the jar. This was a human, the Balak shaman. A human is seen sitting down on a tree stump with a hunter kneeling before him and with other hunters forming a line to see him. He tells the hunter that was kneeling to take his blessing. If he doesn't take it, it would mean that the hunter would have a hard time later on. Ayan explains to Vakir that the Balak hunters feel guilty when they kill their prey, so before they kill, they spread charcoal on their faces to hide themselves from the god of death. Vakir, after hearing the explanation from Ayan, thought about how even the Balaks, which was a warrior tribe, had a shaman as well. The hunters in front of him were complaining about the fact that a human, the shaman, was nagging again, and the male hunter tells the female hunter to let a human be as he was a shaman that needed to establish his position in the tribe as well. Looking at a human spreading his blessing and writing on the faces of the hunter with charcoal made the hunters question the fact that the shaman's blessings usually fail a lot, and that the hunters were only just seeking his blessings whenever there was an occasion. Vakir overheard the hunters talking and thought about if it meant that a human's position as a shaman was meaningless, and realized that the Balak tribe place was not that much different from other places. Ayan had received the blessing from a human and her face was covered in charcoal markings. She kinda looks like a joke. Vakir points to her and tells her that it was quite a sight to see. Ayan attempts to wipe off the charcoal markings on her face, telling Vakir to shut up and that her markings were funny as she didn't get along with the shaman. While blushing hard, she hands over a collar that has spikes all over it and tells Vakir to wear it. Vakir takes the collar with spikes and recognizes it as a dog collar. Ayan wears a similar one and tells him that the hunters wear them on their necks so that they won't get bitten by their prey. Vakir holds onto the rope around his neck while staring at the dog collar in his hand. He thinks silently for a moment before deciding to put it on as he thought about how he was already here, and that it would be better for him to adapt to this place. A white wolf with yellow eyes is seen panting heavily with its tongue hanging out of its mouth. Vakir and Ayan are seen riding on its back. She turns around to Vakir asking him if he was really going to be okay as she had told him to hold onto her waist, but Vakir assures her that he was going to be okay. Ayan then tells him that they were going to leave now, but Vakir suddenly sways heavily to the back. Ayan smiles as she looked behind after hearing a loud sound. She faces Vakir and tells him that he should have grabbed onto her waist and that he would fall if he kept that up. Vakir had fallen flat on his back and onto the ground once Ayan had commended her pet wolf. He stayed flat on the ground thinking about whether he could even get up when his body was in such a horrible state. A shadow is cast over him which piques his attention as he looks up to see what it was. A hun had once again appeared before Ayan and Vakir with his pet wolf behind him. Ayan gets down from her pet wolf and calls out to a hun. A hun informs her that it seems like she was very free as she was busy playing around with her slave. He continues to tell her that he was going to catch a bigger prey this time, so that in the next joint hunt, he would become the captain of the hunting group. He was even going to place his grandfather's honor on the line. Ayan questions him about why he was willing to put his grandfather's honor on the line when his grandfather only knew about shamanism. Just after Vakir had sat up to see what Ayan and Hun were talking about, he sees something fast approaching his face. A hun went on to kick Vakir directly onto the side of his head. This action surprises Ayan, who was shocked to see what Hun was doing to Vakir. She calls him a bastard and asked what he was doing. A hun smiles after kicking Vakir, which sent him flying backward onto the ground. He commented about the fact that Ayan had given Vakir the dog collar, which was a protective piece meant for hunters but was used on Vakir, who was a slave. As he continues to berate and question Ayan about how she was going to use an injured male such as Vakir as a hunting assistant, he tells her to get a hold of herself as she was a commander and that Vakir was only going to be a burden, but Ayan notices something. She shows a smile and wonders if a hun actually believed that Vakir was just an injured male. She informs him to take a look at his waistband before saying those things. A hun takes note of her words and looks at his waistband, which showed signs of being torn apart. This shocks him. Vakir spits out some blood after being kicked by a hun. He shows a smile and was holding onto a quiver holding onto a few arrows. He informs a hun that he should grab hold of his weapons as he would with a lover, as a hun was still stunned as to what had just happened. Vakir then tells him that his quiver and arrows were taken away. Ayan covers her mouth to muffle the sound of her laughter as Ahun continued to look annoyed and stunned while turning to look at Vakir. Ahun finally broke out of his stunned state and rushed over to beat up Vakir even more as he calls Vakir an arrogant slave bastard. But a bow grabs onto his arm just before he lands a punch on Vakir. Ayan tells him that it was enough. She had used her bow to hold onto Ahun to prevent him from attacking Vakir even further. She asks him about whose slave he thought he was going to punish on his own accord. Ahun shouts at her that Vakir was a slave and that he dared to insult a Balak warrior. Ayan replies back to him that he was being pathetic in front of Vakir, but Ahun continued to explain that Vakir was just a slave and questions why she was defending him so much. He then yells at her asking if she had come to like the slave that was Vakir. Ayan remained silent upon hearing that from Ahun and didn't reply back. After a brief moment, she touches her head and tells Ahun that a slave was a slave and that since Vakir did something wrong he should be punished. Ahun agrees with what Ayan was saying and explained that it was what he was saying as well. But Ayan informs him that Vakir was her slave and that he does not have the right to punish him. Vakir then looks curious at what was happening. Ayan had given Vakir a Saitama's one punch straight into his face as blood was splattered out. More blood could be seen splattered onto the nearby grass. Ahun was shocked and stunned once again to see what Ayan had done to Vakir as she continues to beat the crap out of Vakir as punishment. Ayan had finally stopped her punishment as Vakir falls onto the ground with a heavy sound. She then looks at Ahun with her eyes glowing brightly while Vakir lies flat out on the ground in front of them. She asks Ahun if he was happy now. She tells Ahun that she knew that he was upset as he was not able to catch a maiden for himself previously during the ambush with the Morg clan, as her fist was covered with Vakir's blood that was enough to drip down from her hand. Her rage explodes in a mad fury as she tells Ahun that she would beat him up once he did the same shit to her slave again, with her eyes glowing brightly while her hand was still covered in Vakir's blood. Ahun was too stunned to speak as Ayan asked if he got it. He tells her that he got it as Vakir continued to lie on the ground without even a single muscle moving. Some time had passed after the incident with Ahun. Ayan peeks behind with a sad and nervous look on her face. Vakir was behind her with injuries covering his face. They moved slowly through the forest on the back of Ayan's pet wolf. She then asks Vakir if her punishment had hurt and if he was angry, but Vakir remained silent and did not respond to any of her questions. She then explains to Vakir that she needed to have him punished as Ahun was a petty and stubborn guy, and that beating up Vakir as a punishment was the only way to stop his petty retaliations. Vakir remains silent even after Ayan explained her actions. She then asks him about why he was not replying to her. After a while Vakir finally replies to Ayan and states that it was because her punishment hurts. Ayan's eyes open wide as she hears his words. Ayan instantly does a headstand to spin around in the air as Vakir looks at her. She grabs onto Vakir's face, quickly asking a bunch of questions. She asks him if it hurts a lot, or if it was bad, and whether his life was in danger. With his mouth being squeezed by Ayan's hand, he slowly tells her that it hurts to talk. He explains to her that he had these types of injuries a lot, but Ayan moves her face close to his, which stops his sentence halfway. Let's go, girl. Comment below if you are Team Ayan or Team Camus. Licking sounds could be heard in the forest. Ayan was blushing heavily as she touches her mouth while facing Vakir. She then quickly turns around to face away from Vakir. Her eyes are shown to be intensely red as she tells Vakir that she knew that she was right about him and that even though he was an imperial bastard, Vakir had shown promise. Vakir wipes his face with the back of his hand, wondering if the barbarians usually licked each other's injuries, and that licking an injury like how Ayan just did was dangerous as it might spread an infection. She turns around shyly and asked Vakir if he needed something from her, and then even if it was one thing he should tell her, because if it was something that Ayan could do, she would do anything for him. Vakir then asks if he could really ask for anything. This startles Ayan as she jolts up while telling Vakir that a Balak warrior does not go back on their word. Vakir then takes a moment to think deeply about what he wanted. Ayan's heart began to beat hard and loud. She blushes and sweats hard about what he was thinking about so hard. She wonders if Vakir wanted to actually do the deed. Vakir then tells her that if he could do anything, then what he wanted was good. Ayan's heart continued to beat hard and fast in anticipation of what Vakir wanted. Vakir then tells her that he wanted her to teach him how to shoot arrows. Ayan was extremely disappointed in hearing his request and tells him that since it's about arrows it was fine. They continued to travel through the forest on the back of Ayan's pet wolf as she raises her arm, telling Vakir that from tomorrow onwards they would be doing special training. Vakir agrees with her suggestion. A bunch of arrows are seen stuck into a tree. Ayan comments to Vakir that it looked like her slave has no talent in the bow and arrow and that she had told him to aim at the arrow that was already stuck in the tree. Vakir was drawing the string of the bow with sweat dripping down his face as he calls out to Ayan. He asks her if it was alright to teach him how to shoot a bow in such a position, as Ayan could be seen holding onto Vakir with her legs warped around his. She smirks upon hearing Vakir's question and informs him that he was the one that asked her to teach him how to use the bow and that this was the way how young Balak warriors were taught. She continues to instruct Vakir that he should bend his back a little more, while explaining that he won't be able to use the sword for a long time. Because of his body, he needed to learn how to use the bow well, as Vakir needed to capture a large prey for the sake of his reputation after all. Vakir struggles to get into position based on Ayan's instructions as he notes that his bones were at their limits. The sudden appearance of Ayan's pet wolf appearing in the bushes behind them causes Ayan to press a little too hard on Vakir's back as a loud cracking sound is heard. She calls out to her pet wolf called Bakira, asking if he had found something. Bakira barks in response as Vakir is seen kneeling on the ground trembling in pain over Ayan's touch on his back. His face turns purple as he struggles with the pain while Ayan calls him a slave and to get up. She smiles widely at him and informs him that from here onwards they would be moving quickly. A long stream of water is seen moving rapidly as large spikes of rocks are located at the end. Ayan explains to Vakir that this is the area where the river and ocean connect so that both the ocean's water and animals could occupy this area. Ayan informs him that her grandmother told her about this, that a salmon believes that if it successfully swims up the waterfall, it could evolve into a huge beast, as large numbers of salmon fishes could be seen swimming in the waters and jumping into the air. However, Ayan continues her story about how most salmons fail to rise above the waterfall and fall. Eventually, they would be punished when they fall onto the sharp rocks. And that the fish that falls onto the sharp rocks would become good food for an ox bear. A huge bear with horns on its head is seen standing over a salmon that had failed to escape the waterfall and instead had been impaled by a sharp rock. Vakir asks if what they were seeing was an ox bear, as it looked like a completely different species. It was totally different level compared to the ones that he had seen. Ayan tells Vakir that the ox bear in front of them was not an ordinary one as they continue to hide behind the bushes. She explains that it was an ox bear that was born from a superior bloodline and has survived countless pandemonium. Vakir looks over to Ayan nervously and asked if she was telling him to capture that bear version of Godzilla. Ayan tells him that there was no way, as she didn't tell her pet wolf Bakira to find her a strong female to hunt. A clawed brown foot appears while Ayan tells Vakir that their prey was the male bear that comes to court the female bear, just as a huge number of male ox bears appear beside the female ox bear. The female and male ox bears were soon engaged in an intense eye-staring contest. The female ox bear soon bitch slaps the male ox bear straight into his face. Seeing this situation caused Vakir to be shocked. The female ox bear continues to bitch slap each of the male ox bears one by one easily with each of her claws. Vakir commented that the female ox bear keeps rejecting the proposal of the male ox bears. He soon wonders about how strong of a male ox bear was the female ox bear she was looking for, as the male ox bear continued to leave the female ox bear one by one. Ayan turns to Vakir and informs him that he had the wrong way of thinking about it, as it was the opposite. She finally tells him that the female ox bear was not looking for a strong male ox bear, just as a pink-looking male ox bear appears in front of the female ox bear. Both the male and female ox bears soon touch noses with each other. Vakir was stunned to see that the strong Godzilla-like female ox bear had chosen the weakest-looking male ox bear, but Ayan seemed happy as she explains that the female ox bear was looking for a mate that she could boss around. She explains to Vakir that when a strong male ox bear gets excited, there were situations where it kills its partner, which made them not popular among the ox bears, which was why the female ox bears would look for weaker and smaller partners. This was similar to how the Balak warriors would select their partners. She then asks Vakir if he knew what kind of spouses were the most popularly chosen. She answers her own question by saying it was a young entity that possessed excellent DNA, and it would be even better if they were weakened due to an injury. Vakir remained silent upon hearing Ayan's explanation and thought about how Ayan was basically saying that as long as she gets the DNA, then everything would be fine. The female and male ox bear soon left together as Ayan tells Vakir that they were going to wait as the female ox bear will suppress the male ox bear's strength completely. Deep within the forest, a mix of roaring and growling sexual sounds could be heard throughout the forest. Vakir was seen standing still with a dull expression on his face as he continues to hear the sexual roars and moans of the ox bears. He was standing silently in front of a cave entrance as the growling noises became louder. Food made up of berries, fish and fruits are seen piled on top of leaves. It had been 4 days since Vakir had to listen to the ox bear's moans, which soon made Vakir unaware of what he was doing right now. Ayan soon appears and asks him if he had left any food for the ox bears. He tells her that he did as he returns to their campsite where a shelter and campfire had been made. Vakir has been giving the hungry ox bears food over the past 4 days so that they could continue their mating. Our boy has become a fluffer for the bears, lol. Ayan picks up a pinkish berry in her hand and explains to him that the fruit has an effect where it boosts one's strength temporarily, but in the end, it was harmful as it consumes one's lifespan instead. She further explains that the female who was more intelligent would understand their intentions and that the male would understand as well, but in order to handle the female he had no choice but to eat it. Vakir thought of the scenario where the male ox bear was attempting to escape from the female ox bear. He now understood the reason why Ayan had chosen a big and strong female as their target. Her plan was to deplete the male's strength. 2 bowls of soup are seen on the ground which Ayan had made. She tells Vakir to eat up so he could heal. Vakir accepts the meal and commented that the ox bears were really mating like crazy. Isn't that normal? Ayan tells Vakir, which causes him to spit out the bowl of soup. She giggles at Vakir's reaction and tells him that all male Baloks were like that, but guessed that imperial males like Vakir weren't, and then she guessed that since he came from a geeky country, it meant that Vakir couldn't mate as the crazy ox bears could. Ayan continues to taunt Vakir, asking him if he could do it like the ox bears as he wipes the soup off his face. She leans closer to Vakir, playfully teasing him and asking if he could. A fierce loud roar soon catches Ayan's attention. Vakir was alarmed to see Ayan's reaction as she quickly grabs onto her bow, telling Vakir to get ready as the fierce roar continues to be heard. She noted that the female ox bear had finally been impregnated as the female ox bear is seen towering over the collapsed body of the male ox bear. Good job, bro, you tried your hardest. The female ox bear lets out one more loud and fierce roar into the air that causes it to shake. The fierce roar causes the male ox bear to run away from the cave in a hurry. Vakir and Ayan are seen sitting on the branches of the tree. Vakir then asks Ayan about why the female ox bear was chasing the male ox bear away. She explains that an ox bear that has finished mating is no different from a competitive predator who has intruded a territory and that it was a warning to the male ox bear to never come back. Vakir understands and commented that the female ox bear wants to sleep since she had used her strength and has not slept for the past 4 days as he looks at Ayan. Ayan looks at him and tells him that the female ox bear would hide herself in a safe and remote place and that from here onwards they would find her traces and chase after it quietly. As Ayan prepares her bow and arrows, she tells Vakir that once the female ox bear starts to go to sleep, that was when they would start their hunt. Up in the snowy mountains, Vakir's legs could be seen walking through the mountains. Ayan and Vakir are seen riding on Vakir's back between 2 large pillars of stone. Vakir commented that the female ox bear would be tired but is moving so far away. Ayan tells him that she was finding a place that has the least number of threats that the forest possesses, and that the place where they were was cold, making sure that mosquitoes that suck bones or blood could not live here. Vakir then asks Ayan if the female ox bear knew about those facts and came here knowing that. Ayan tells him that the female ox bear's intelligence is quite high and that its acquired knowledge is better than its instincts. As they continued to follow the trail of the female ox bear, Vakir could start to feel the coldness of the area due to his body's condition as he covers his body with his arms. Ayan turns around to ask if Vakir was feeling cold and that if he was, he could put his body closer to hers, but Vakir tells her that he was fine. Ayan warns him that his body temperature could decrease, making his body become stiff, and when his body becomes stiff it might get in their way when they start hunting. She then asks if he plans on getting in her way. Vakir thinks deeply about the facts Ayan had stated, thinking that it was a rational reason. and wonders if she was capable of making such rational decisions. He soon agrees and hugs tightly onto Ayan's body, causing her to jolt up and blush heavily. Ayan soon grew nervous and thought to herself that she was only doing this because she was concerned for her slave's health and that it was the duty of a master to look after their slave. Bagheera soon notices something up ahead. He lets out a fierce growl which catches both Ayan's and Bagheera's attention. They soon notice that the female ox bear footprints on the ground soon disappeared halfway. Ayan shouted out that the female ox bear's trace had disappeared. She turns to look around and wondered where the female ox bear had disappeared to, just as a pair of red eyes appear in the shadows right behind Ayan. Something fast was approaching Ayan at a high speed. She soon realizes it and turns to see what it was. It was the female ox bear. She launches straight towards Ayan at full speed with her claws close to Ayan while letting out a devastating roar. Thanks for watching the latest part from the Voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.